The American Psychological Association's Citing and Referencing Guide, commonly referred to as APA, is likely the most common citing and referencing style used in academia. However, many students struggle with APA, particularly the in-text citations, because the style outlines a number of complicated and nuanced rules. This video outlines the basics of in-text citations as outlined in APA's 7th edition to give you the foundational knowledge you need to successfully incorporate APA guidelines into your paper. To provide you with a basic foundational understanding of APA guidelines with respect to in-text citations, we're going to first define what citation is, outline when to use citation in your paper, and then go into detail about how to actually cite the material you integrate into your paper. Before discussing when and how to cite, it is important to define citation. This will give us an understanding as to the purpose of citations so that we can execute them effectively. When defining citation, it's important to compare it with referencing. Citing and referencing are often used interchangeably by people. However, although they work toward the same goal, they actually serve two separate functions. Citing refers to the in-text citation, the brief parenthetical notes that indicate when an idea presented in your writing relies upon the work or thinking of another. They're supposed to be as brief and concise as possible and serve as coordinates that direct the reader to the reference page. And the reference page is where the reader will find the detailed notes that identify authors, titles, publishers, and any other important information about the resources you've consulted that will help the reader locate those sources should they want to read them. Let's take a look at how these differ and the specific nuances of citation. First, it's important to understand the contents of a citation. Typically, a citation will include the surnames of the authors, the year of publication, and in some instances, it will include the page number or paragraph number of the source. The contents of the references are far more comprehensive than that of the citation. In addition to having the author's name and initial, as well as the year of publication, the reference will also include an article and/or book title, a journal, newspaper, or magazine title, as well as the publisher, electronic location, and in other instances, information such as editors and translators and page ranges. One of the most common issues we see with respect to citation is the unnecessary inclusion of article titles. Let's take a look at a specific example. Carlson et al., 2011, in their article, "You Probably Think This Paper is About You, Narcissists' Perceptions of Their Personality and Reputation," argue that narcissists believe they make a great first impression. Now, this approach has two key issues. The first is word count. The title of this article is 14 words, and you need 3 words and an introductory phrase to introduce it. That's 17 words total, and in academia, when you get short papers and short word counts, you have to conserve that space. Including the title will take up an unnecessary amount of your word count that you could be saving for your content. In addition, you probably heard as I was reading how including that title broke up the flow of the sentence and interrupted the key idea. Let's take a look at that same example without the article title. Carlson et al., 2011, argue that narcissists believe they make great first impressions. This sentence has a significantly shorter word count. It's a simple, easy to read sentence where the focus and idea is clear, and it still provides the coordinates needed to locate the work in the reference. So if the reader wants to know the title, they can still find it. Now, there are instances where you might include the title. For example, your entire paper might be doing a critical review of one article, in which case it would likely make sense to introduce the article title in your introduction. But during lit reviews and other parts of your paper, when you're simply referring to some data from a given article, including the title is unnecessary. Now that we understand why we use citation, it's important to understand when we're supposed to use citation. There are 3 key instances when we're supposed to use citation. First, we use it for direct quotes. Second, we use it for paraphrased passages. And third, we use it for summaries. When we're using direct quotations, there are several things to keep in mind. First, anytime we have 3 significant words or more from a source, they require quotation marks. Second, when using direct quotations, the citations typically have the author's last name, year of publication, and a page number. And finally, the key thing here, APA prefers paraphrasing to direct quotation. Let's take a look at the rule about 3 significant words. Here we have a quote from the author Kurt Vonnegut, "So it goes." Now in this case, we might not actually need to put quote marks around it, even if we choose to do so. Why? Even though we have 3 words, they aren't significant words. Let's take a look at each of them. First, we have so, which is simply a conjunction or adverb. That's followed by it, which is a general pronoun that doesn't refer to anything specifically. So in this context, the only word that might be considered significant is the verb goes. Thus, even though there's 3 words, there aren't 3 significant words. And though we might still provide a citation, we wouldn't necessarily need to quote it. Alternately, we have here a quote from famed baseball player and coach Yogi Berra. He says, "Never answer an anonymous letter." Now, in this case, we have the words answer, anonymous, and letter. Those are 3 significant words. "An" is simply an article, so that might not be considered significant, but when paired with the other words, it's clear that it's a substantial number of words, and if we use these words exactly, we must put quote marks around them. And in addition to providing the author's last name and year of publication, we'll also be required to provide a page number. So, as mentioned, when using the direct quote, in addition to having the author's name and year of publication, we're also required to have a page number. Now we'll go into a little more detail about this later, but let's take a look at a basic example with a quote from famed American author Mark Twain. Quote, "It is better to keep your mouth closed and let people think you are a fool than to open it and remove all doubt." In parentheses after the quote, we put the author's last name, Twain, comma, the year of publication, 1898, comma, and the page number, P period, a space, and then the page number. The period will go outside of the parentheses. Special note. In APA citing and referencing style, paraphrasing is typically preferred to using direct quotes. However, there are some instances where we might use a direct quote. For example, lists of academic terms. When we have a list, we can't restructure it the same way that we can restructure a sentence, nor can we paraphrase the words or change them because they're specific academic terms. Likewise, if we're providing a definition, particularly one from a reliable or credible source, we might choose to put it in the exact words of the original source so that we can use that definition as a measuring stick for our analysis later in the paper. That said, typically, you're going to try to paraphrase as much as possible. With that said, let's take a look at what is required of a paraphrase passage and why they're beneficial. First, a paraphrase passage will frame ideas from the source in your own words. This creates consistency when citing material written in different tenses or perspectives. In this case, the author's last name and year of publication is required. You do not have to put the page number, although you can include a page number if you desire. In order to understand how paraphrasing can facilitate consistency in your writing, let's take a look at an example of a paragraph where we rely on quotes in each citation. According to Nazareth, 1975, "Love wounds and mars any heart not strong nor tough enough to take a lot of pain." P period 34. When speaking of love, Martin, 2002, states that nobody said it was easy, but no one ever said it would be this hard. Page 34. This is supported by Gaynor, 1978, who claims that it took all the strength I had not to fall apart after having her heart broken. P period 38. However, all you need is love, Lennon and McCartney. Now this paragraph seems a little fragmented, in large part because we've relied so heavily on quotation. But in addition, we see shifts in perspective. The first two sources write in third person. Love wounds, nobody said. These two are written in third person, but they have different subjects in third person. When we move to our third source, they write in first person. I had. And the final source moves to second person. You need. This inconsistency can cause confusion for readers. Let's take another look at that paragraph, but this time we're going to paraphrase and reorder it slightly so as to create a higher level of consistency. Though there is limited research that suggests love is difficult, there are likewise no studies that suggest it is effortless, Martin 2002. Moreover, studies have found that one's heart must be resilient to avoid injury, Nazareth 1975, as it takes significant strength to overcome heartache, Gaynor 1978. That said, Lennon and McCartney argue that all one requires is love. In this context, each of our sentences is written in third person. There is, love is, there is, one's heart must be, one requires. This creates consistency throughout the entire paragraph, which makes it easier for the reader to understand your focus, direction, and perspective. One of the benefits to using paraphrase passages instead of direct quotes is that the citation will only require the author's last name and year of publication in most instances. For example, if you were to quote Dorothy Gale, you would have to write Gale, 1939, notes that, quote, there is no place like home, and then require a page number. That actually adds to your word count and makes the material longer. However, if you simply paraphrase it, you only need the author's last name and year of publication in this case. According to Gale, home is unlike any other place. Special note. As mentioned, you do not need to include page numbers for paraphrase passages. However, they can be included at your discretion. And there are typically two instances where we might include a page number. First, when we're referring to specific details. For example, if there's a percentage that's mentioned on a specific page that isn't mentioned anywhere else in the article, you might choose to include the page number so that your reader has an easy time locating that information. Likewise, if you're taking information from a long work, such as a book, it might be a good idea to provide a page number because it will be much more difficult for your reader to locate that information in a book than they would in a relatively short journal article. In many ways, the summary is similar to a paraphrase passage. The key difference is that rather than simply putting something in your own words, there's a focus on condensing long text into a short passage. However, it's similar to the paraphrase passage in that all you require is the author's last name and year of publication in most instances. Let's take a look at an example that outlines how a summary focuses on condensing. Your sentence might read as follows. Practicing yoga has several benefits, including improved balance, strength, and joint health. Carr, 2020. In this case, the original source might have spent an entire paragraph outlining the improved balance, another paragraph on strength, and another paragraph on joint health. But all you have done is listed those three benefits in one concise sentence. You'll notice also the citation only includes the author's last name and year of publication because this is all that's required, just like the paraphrase passage. However, you could include the page number at your discretion. Now that we understand what a citation is, what its purposes are, and when we need to include them, we have to understand how to create this citation. Before we move on, it's important to understand that there are two categories of citation, the narrative citation and the parenthetical citation. Let's take a look at how these two different forms of citation differ. Let's take a look at a narrative citation. Like Chardonnay, Lizzo, 2019, suggests that she improves with time. In this context, Lizzo, the author, is actually part of the sentence. This is what's called a narrative citation, When your author or authors are part of your sentence, they're part of your narrative. The year of publication alone goes in citation. Now let's take a look at a parenthetical citation. Wearing masks can help reduce the spread of infectious diseases. Parentheses, Fauci 2020, and parentheses, period. Now in this case, the author's name is not part of the sentence, but rather inside the parenthetical information. And this is what we call a parenthetical citation. When using narrative and parenthetical citations in the context of direct quotes, they can impact the way we format them differently. So let's take a look at how that might function. When introducing a direct quote, we can either use a narrative citation or a parenthetical citation. In the case of the narrative citation, we'll typically put the author's name before the quotation and the page number comes after. Here we have Grande 2019 suggests that, quote, there are no tears left to cry, end quote, pp period 45-46. This creates a split citation. In the parenthetical citation, we put all that information together after the quote. Evidence suggests that, quote, there are no tears left to cry, end quote, Grande 2019, pp period 45-46. In this case, what we want to pay attention to is the fact that the page number always comes after the quote, not before it. Special note. Typically, when we draw a quote from a source, the entirety of that quote can be found on a single page. However, in some cases, the quote will actually bridge from one page to the following page in the original source. And in this case, we should cite it as follows. Parentheses, Grande, comma, 2019, comma, pp period, space 45-46, close parentheses. In this case, we put pp, which stands for the page that the quote starts on and the page that the quote ends on. Then we have the page range bridged together with a dash. Just as there are differences between the narrative citation and parenthetical citation with respect to direct quotes, there is also a difference with respect to the paraphrase passages and summaries. When providing an in-text citation for a paraphrase passage or summary, we can use either the narrative citation or the parenthetical citation. The narrative citation will look something like this. Holmes and Watson, 2017, suggest that deductive reasoning can help solve crimes. Alternately, the parenthetical citation reads as follows. Deductive reasoning can help solve crimes. Holmes and Watson, 2017. Now, there is a difference between the ways the names are formatted in the narrative citation and the parenthetical citation. If you look closely, you'll see the narrative citation spells out the word and, A-N-D. But when both the names are in parentheses in the parenthetical citation, we use the ampersand, the and symbol, in place of and. Now keep in mind, we only use the ampersand when it's inside the parentheses. If the names are part of the sentence, we must spell it out. Now that we've seen both styles, the question is, which should we use? The answer is that it depends on the context. When you're considering which to use, you want to consider three things. First, word count. Then, whether or not there are repetitive citations. And finally, if there are repetitive sentence structures. Let's consider word count using the example with Ariana Grande that we just looked at. In the narrative citation, the sentence featured 13 words. In the parenthetical citation, it featured 14 words. In this case, we might choose to go with the narrative citation because the word count is slightly shorter, but this isn't always the case. Let's look at word count again using the Sherlock and Watson example that we just went over. In the narrative citation, the sentence features 12 words, but in the parenthetical citation, it only uses 10 words. In this case, the parenthetical one is shorter, so we might use that if word count is an issue. Repetitive citation is also something that we want to consider. Let's take a look at an example where we use a parenthetical citation in each instance. Anecdotal evidence suggests a drug known as FCM caused arousal in humans, Loc 1989. Likewise, animal testing found that it elicited excitement in dogs, Loc 1989. Other anecdotal evidence found that it inspired an excessive desire for extreme commitment, Loc 1989. Thus, it is recommended that the drug not be used, Loc 1989. Now, technically, because each sentence came from the source, we need to provide a citation for it. However, as you can see, that repetitive citation at the end of each sentence can really weigh down the sentence. What we might do instead is introduce a narrative citation and close with a parenthetical citation, and then use what we call signal phrasing in between. Here we have Loc, 1989, conducted a meta-analysis on a drug known as FCM. In some cases, he found that it caused arousal in humans. However, he also found that it inspired an excessive desire for human commitment. Meta-analysis likewise reviewed some animal testing and found that it elicited excitement in dogs. Thus, due to conflicting findings, it is recommended that this drug not be used, Loc 1989. Now we have a citation sandwich where we open and close with the citation. In between, we use a signal phrasing. We say, he found, or he also found, which refers back to Loc. It also says the meta-analysis. Which meta-analysis? The one we just alluded to in that opening sentence. And then when the last sentence is introduced, there's no signal phrasing, but that's okay because we close that sentence out with the parenthetical citation. In this way, you can avoid those repetitious citations by introducing a narrative citation, closing with the parenthetical, and using the signal phrasing in between to tell the reader that you're still talking about the same subject that you've already provided a citation for. In this example, we had the same author throughout the paragraph, which created obvious repetition. But even when we have different authors in each sentence, we can unwittingly create a repetitive sentence structure by relying too heavily on the narrative citation. Let's take a look at an example of this. Orbison, 1961, reports that love causes pain. Giles, 1980, argues that love has a strong odor. Shakespeare, 1601, suggests love has an ennobling power. Donne, 1627, supports this, arguing that love facilitates redemption. Now we see here the repetitive sentence structure. Orbison reports, Giles argue, Shakespeare suggests, Donne supports. What we want to do is restructure this paragraph so that we focus on the information and push the authors into a parenthetical citation to create a more organic structure. Research has found that love causes pain, Orbison 1961, and has a strong odor, Giles 1980. However, some studies found that love has an ennobling power, Shakespeare 1601, and facilitated redemption, Donne 1962. We've taken out these names at the beginning, and that's created space for us to use transition words like and, however, and another and. That shows that we're adding ideas and contrasting ideas. This avoids the repetition and creates a better flow for the paragraph. Adding commentary after cited material. If you add commentary after a citation within the same sentence, always be sure to insert the citation where the source's information ends and your commentary begins so that the two are not confused. Let's take a look at an example. One researcher argues that you should not hate the player, but rather the game. Durant, 2017, which is practical advice. Now this last part, which is practical advice, is your analysis of the first part. You'll notice that we put the citation where the information from the source ends and before your own analysis. The common error that students make is putting the citation at the end of the sentence. And there's 3 potential problems if you do this. First, you give credit away for your own analysis. As academics, you are expected to add your own original ideas and content to your paper. If you give credit away to a source that you've cited, the person reading your paper or evaluating it won't see the contributions that you are making. Second, if the reader goes to the source and they see that this commentary is not present, they'll assume one of two things: either that you are misrepresenting the data or that you are misinterpreting the data, and neither of these is going to bode well for your grade. Thus, whenever you're adding commentary after cited information in the same sentence, always be sure to put the citation at the end of the cited information and before your own commentary, so that the reader can see where one ends and the other begins. Now we know the basic components of a citation. However, APA does have different rules depending on the number of authors that are in the cited material. There's one set of rules for 2 authors and another set of rules for 3 or more authors. Let's take a look at each of these. When citing 2 authors, we're always going to use both authors' names. Let's say, for example, we're citing Wayne and Grayson, aka Batman and Robin. In the first citation, we'll use both names. Wayne and Grayson, 2016, argue that wearing spandex makes crime fighting easier. If we go back to them in a subsequent citation, we will still use both names. Penguins and cats can be devious, Wayne and Grayson, 2016. Whenever you're using 2 authors, always use both names in your citation. Now you will see again, we've used a narrative citation in the first example, so we have to spell out the word and, A-N-D, and in the parenthetical citation, we use the ampersand. But it's 2 authors, so again, we always use both authors' names. When citing 3 or more authors, APA has a different rule. In this case, we have 3 authors, Stark, Parker, and Banner. Stark is the lead author, and the 3 of them have decided to write an article about Thanos. Now, in the past, APA had more complicated rules, but they've simplified them for the 7th edition. 3 or more authors, we're simply going to use the first author's name plus the words et al. Here, Stark et al. 2019 found that Thanos destroyed 50% of the Earth's population. Because it's a stat, it needs a citation, and because we have 3 or more authors, we'll use the first author's name plus et al. Special note. Et al. Comes from the Latin et alia, which means and others. Et is the complete word, al is an abbreviation, so it gets a period. And when we're using et al., it's critical that we treat it as a plural because it is referring to others as a group of people. Let's take a look at how this applies to subject-verb agreement. Oftentimes, people might write something to the effect of Abdullah et al. Argues, because Abdullah argues sounds right. But the subject-verb agreement is actually incorrect here. Abdullah et al. Refers to a group of people and is therefore plural. So we would actually write Abdullah et al. Argue. So keep in mind, whenever we're using et al., treat it as a plural noun with respect to the subject-verb agreement. All right, we've covered the basics for APA citation. So let's do a quick summary. First, we will always address authorship. This will typically be in the form of an author's name or names, or an organization's name, though it might also include an article title. We will always address the publication date almost universally as the year of publication, but sometimes we will use the initials ND for no date. You will include a page number or other locator when necessary. This might include a timestamp or paragraph. However, as we noted, if you feel that it would provide benefits to the reader, you can also include them at your discretion for paraphrase passages or summaries. The citation will be placed either immediately before or immediately after the cited information, not necessarily at the end of the sentence. When citing 2 authors, you will always include both authors' names. When citing 3 or more authors, use the first author's names plus et al. And when using et al., always treat it as a plural noun. Now, I realize that a lot of these rules are a little confusing, a little nuanced, a little complicated. So if you do have any questions about APA citing and referencing or any other citing and referencing questions, don't hesitate to book an appointment at the Writing Support Desk through My Success. We do recommend that you book early because our appointments fill up fast. So if you do have questions, be sure to book the appointment and we'll look forward to helping you. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.